Good evening and welcome to another episode of Eddie V Live. I'm your host, Eddie V, and we are on Wednesday of the second week of Easter. Hope your Easter season is going strongly, and I hope this mic is recording. It looks like it is, so we're going to keep going. So, welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking, hopefully briefly, on some papal stuff. I ran into a couple things recently that I've wanted to get on the air with you. And then if we have time, we're going to move into just some brief discussions of looksmaxxing that I've also recently been wanting to get on air. So we'll start with the papal stuff. First, I want to mention, I think I've talked about some papal stuff on here. First, I want to say, there is an extent where I think the obsession with everything the Pope says is kind of cringe and not necessary, which is funny because usually what people obsess about is what the Pope says like every single day, whether he's like tweeting or something. But then I will say it is really important, especially for theologians, but I think just for everyone, I think it's a good idea to pay attention to official papal documents, encyclicals, apostolic letters, not just to figure out what the church teaches, which is also great. But a lot of these can just be very helpful for life in general. A lot of good guidance, a lot of good spiritual guidance, moral guidance. So I think it's important to pay attention to that stuff. Maybe, or not maybe, but it just is less important to pay attention to the everyday, like agenda and comments that the Pope makes. If you really want to, I'm not going to stop you. I think it might be a waste of time, but maybe it's helpful to you. I don't know. I try not to follow it too much. But the encyclicals I really enjoy. And I first want to mention, I actually saw a really good conversation between my former professor, Dr. John Joy. He's got some great videos. He also did some great videos with Michael Lofton back in the day, probably like 4 or 5 years ago, that are awesome. A lot of them about the magisterium. So if you're interested in that, check those out for sure. He is a legend in the game when it comes to the magisterium and other things. But I saw a conversation between Dr. John Joy and a guy named Ryan Grant, who I'm not familiar with, but he seems to be a very educated man. And they were talking about the legitimacy or illegitimacy of the Pope being able to, I forgot the exact title of it, but they were talking about whether the Pope is able even to take away the Latin Mass or to abrogate the Latin Mass. And it's essentially. And they had a really good conversation. I think they made a really good distinction between authority and power. I'm not going to get into that today, but I've discussed the Latin Mass before. And so if anyone's interested in that topic, I recommend it's on YouTube. You could probably just type in John Joy, Ryan Grant, pretty simple names, hopefully, and you can watch that for yourself. Both guys are very well read. This Ryan Grant guy that I don't really know, he seemed very well read. I was impressed. And the more I look into things, the more retarded I feel, like I don't know anything. Maybe that's how it's supposed to be. But this guy knows Latin and he's read documents that I've never read before, which, good for him, fantastic. But I'm not feeling super intelligent, which is okay, which is a-okay. So I first wanted to shout them out. And then, sorry, I'm getting my phone ready here. And then I wanted to discuss something I saw in a textbook, a Catholic Church history textbook for high school ecclesiology. And in this textbook, they were talking about Vatican I. And they were talking about the eventual or the previous declaration of the Immaculate Conception, I believe in 1854, and the 1950 declaration of the Assumption of Mary. And they were arguing, not even arguing, they were just stating as a fact in this textbook on church history that those were the only two infallible statements by the magisterium. And this is not the first time I've heard this. Usually people will say there's like 5. This textbook was saying 2. And it just really bothers me because I do not think that is true. That is not true. And the place you need to start is if you want to get into this topic about infallibility, because everyone likes to chime in on it, which is fine. But if you want to get into this topic, you have to read Vatican I, Vatican II on papal infallibility, because it directly talks about when the Pope is infallible and what that actually looks like. And there's parameters listed out for you. We can debate those parameters, but if you don't even know the parameters, you're behind in the game. So to be clear, and you can watch videos, you can read those documents to get those parameters. So I'm not going to chug through it unless someone kind of, tries to combat me in this, and then I'll bring them out. But if it's just passing and no one cares, I don't want to dive that deep into it. But just to say shortly that there is way more than 2 or 5 statements of infallibility by the magisterium. And there's actually really good arguments between theologians about how many there have been, which ones are which. Some of them are obvious, some of them are not so obvious. So I think he was an archbishop. He might have just been a bishop. Gasser, in Vatican I, he was responsible for kind of explaining some of these documents. And he let it slip. I believe he said it was either hundreds and no, I think it was thousands and thousands of infallible statements by the magisterium. Paraphrasing a statement like that. So that was his comments as he is explaining some of the stuff from Vatican I. And I don't know if I would believe it. There's a lot, but there's definitely way more than 5 or 2. And so I want to maybe talk about what some of those might be. I want to show you one of them just so you can see what it looks like. Some obvious ones are the ones we already mentioned, 1854, 1950. Those are some obvious. I feel like I'm getting really close to the mic. If I'm like yelling in your ear, I apologize. But there are some obvious ones like those, 1854, 1950. And there's some other ones that, maybe just don't hit the presses as hard, but they're still infallible statements. So, and then there's also debates, and I think some of the debates are just pretty clear what is true, like whether anathemas are infallible statements. I would argue that they are. The Supreme Pontiff, as the head of the Holy Catholic Church, in his chair, in his authority, is saying that if you believe this, then you are cut off from the church. And that seems pretty definitive to me. It is on faith and morals. He is acting as the Roman pontiff, as the Supreme Pontiff of the church. It doesn't get any more infallible than that. And again, I'm mentioning kind of these things from the Vatican I, Vatican II discussions, so you'll have to look those up. But yeah, so, and especially if you count those individually as like each anathema, and those are infallible, there's going to be a ton of them. So it's way more than 2 or 5. Don't buy into that. I'm going to show you one right now that is actually from John Paul II's reign. It's going to be an apostolic letter called, I'm going to butcher this Latin, an apostolic letter called Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. Oh, wait, let me just look at it before I butcher this. I didn't have the name in front of me. Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. And it's of John Paul II to the bishops of the Catholic Church on reserving priestly ordination to men alone. So you can kind of guess what this infallible statement is going to be. And I'll talk a little bit about this, but this is just to show you. So that was not one of the 2, right, that usually people mention or this textbook mentions, but this is an infallible statement. And John Paul II wrote this apostolic letter literally just to state this, as define this and get this over with. And it's not, and some people backfire me as like, it was already infallible before. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I don't even know what that means, but yes, it was true already. Any infallible statement is not making up something new that's true. It's stating something definitively that was already true. And then people argue whether they can repeatedly say something as infallible. It's like, I don't see why not, but we could talk about that. But this is the statement. There's, it's a little letter. It's not big, but I'm just going to read the statement that has the infallibility the definitive infallible statement in it. He says towards the end, and I quote, "Wherefore, in order that all doubt may be removed regarding a matter of great importance, a matter which pertains to the Church's divine constitution itself, in virtue of my ministry of confirming the brethren, I declare that the Church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women, and that this judgment is to be definitively held by all the Church's faithful." End quote. So some of the characteristics there that I will mention. So I think it's obvious in this apostolic letter, he is teaching as the head of the church, in the chair of Peter, as supreme pontiff, as ruler over all. I don't think there's a doubt there, but we can talk about that if anyone disagrees. I think he is definitively declaring something that has to be believed by all by all Catholics. It is being bound to everyone, not just to a specific situation or place. It's bound to everyone. And it is on something that is of the faith or of morals. And I think this is of faith. And I think he even discusses here, which pertains to the church's divine constitution itself. So he's kind of alluding to that. Maybe not even alluding, just clearly stating that. So those are some of the characteristics that need to be had. They are all in this document. They're all contained in here in this apostolic letter. So I would argue that this is an infallible statement. And this is an infallible statement from John Paul II about just is, there will never be a woman ordained a priest in the Holy Catholic Church. And that is just true. It's just not possible to do otherwise. So that is an example of an infallible statement. So biggest thing is that the church is not just sitting there doing nothing. It's teaching a ton of stuff. A lot of things are infallible, especially, this is a little clue here of what that looks like. And there's other ones that we can go over if this becomes an issue. And the church is also, and when it's not teaching infallibly, when it's still teaching, it is teaching authoritatively, right? And that's another discussion we can have as well. So a lot of the stuff, for example, from Vatican II, I don't think there's a single infallible statement in Vatican II. I'm open to being corrected on that. It's been a while since I've read all the documents, but I don't think there's any infallible statements in Vatican II, but it's still teaching authoritatively, right? So there's a distinction there. Everything it says it's not protected by infallibility. It's not, doesn't have these characteristics, but it is still teaching authoritatively as a legitimate council with papal approval. So I want to leave that there. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. But I really, that frustrates me more almost than when people say like the church is over 2,000 years old. And I'm just like, that's just a math problem. But this is another problem too. We have a lot of these things and I'm sure this is everywhere, not just in the Catholic Church, where people is very like rote and people just repeat stuff to repeat it. And they don't really think about it. They haven't really looked into it, which, it's mostly innocent. But when it comes to infallible stuff, I feel it's necessary. We gotta come correct. We gotta correct people on that. This has to do with faith and morals. This has to do with our faith, and it's important. So I think we need to make sure. And honestly, most people are not going to care, which is sad. Maybe they don't need to. Maybe the peasants in the field, they don't need to know this. I don't know, but I think it's good to know. And if you're interested in this, God bless you. The next thing I want to talk about briefly is these statements I was reading. I was reading the Syllabus of Errors. I think it was yesterday or today. And just people argue that the Syllabus of Errors infallible because you have the Syllabus of Errors, then you have a encyclical. Oh boy, I'm going to blank. I think it's called Quanta Cura, where pretty definitive language from Blessed Pius IX saying these errors that are mentioned in the syllabus are condemned as errors. They are condemned by the church. Sorry, I should have brought it up. I didn't bring the exact words he said. Next time, if we talk about it, I'll bring it up. So these this is less sure for me personally, but I think these are infallible as well. And I want to read to you one section from it. So this is from the Syllabus of Errors, 1864, I believe. And this is from the third section of it called Indifferentism and Latitudinarianism. Latitudinarianism. That's a big word. And there is about four points that I want to read to you. So keep in mind, these are Syllabus of Errors. So he's naming the errors. So it's not that the church is teaching this. He's teaching that the church is condemning these as errors. So it's going to sound weird, but we can talk about it after. So I quote, this is number 15. Every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which, guided by the light of reason, he shall consider true. So, end quote. So that is saying that that is an error, that every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which, guided by light of reason, he shall consider true. So it's saying it's an error. Not every man is free to embrace whatever religion he thinks is right. Interesting, because this kind of comes up a little bit with Vatican II, and I've been meaning. There's a guy, a professor in like England, that claims that he can, kind of um, keep the continuity of this teaching with Vatican II and previous teachings of the church. I'm not worried about it, but this is very strong language from Pius IX. So I'm curious how that works out in terms of freedom of religion. Number 16, quote, man may, in the observance of any religion whatever, find the way of eternal salvation and arrive at eternal salvation. End quote. Boom. Blessed Pius IX is saying that that is an error, that you can find eternal salvation in any religion whatever. That is incorrect. Incorrect. And he's saying that as an error. That is condemned by the church. 17, quote, good hope, at least, is to be entertained of the eternal salvation of all those who are not at all in the true church of Christ. End quote. That is an error. There should not be good hope entertained for the eternal salvation of those who are not in the true church of Christ. If you have good hope in that, you are in error, according to Blessed Pius IX and the Syllabus of Errors. That's going to be a huge blow to people. I hear people all the time saying, I got my Protestant brother and sister, I got my Jehovah's Witness, I got my Muslims, I got my Mormons. I'm not saying that they can't be saved, and there's always time until death, but I'm saying Blessed Pius IX, potentially infallible teachings from the Syllabus of Errors, is saying you shouldn't have good hope about it. That is an error. They need to get in the Church of Christ. All right, I know I went strongly on that one, but we'll go to the last one. This is number 18. Quote, Protestantism is nothing more than another form of the same true Christian religion, in which form it is given to please God equally as in the Catholic Church. End quote. So this is basically saying it's an error to think that Protestantism is another form of Catholicism. It is not. It is not. That is an error. And maybe, hopefully, that's kind of obvious to most people. But, a lot of the ecumenism nowadays kind of makes some of the stuff seem like that. But we need to remember, Blessed Pius IX, that is not true. That is not true. And I have not seen the church yet refute these statements. And I haven't heard anyone refute them, really. People claim that Vatican II teaches some of this stuff, or some of the stuff after with John Paul II or Pope Francis or Pope Leo. Let me see it. I want to see it. But this is from the Syllabus of Errors. Now I'm going to stop there. There's a lot of good stuff in there, but those were very eye-popping to me. So I wanted to read them for you. So I wanted to get into that because that textbook kind of was just bothering me. And I did watch a couple of really good talks with Dr. John Joy and Ryan Grant. So I appreciate them, if they ever see this. They're doing great work, awesome work, good discussion. If you are SSPX, Sedevacantists, or if you're a Catholic, traditional Catholic, anywhere in between, and you're curious in the subject, that conversation between those two is a great, great resource. And they talk about a lot of stuff that you can read to get more knowledge on the subject. So I definitely recommend it. They get the technicalities of a lot of different things. It's beautiful. It's honestly great. All right. And then I think we do have time. So I'm going to go into, I want to talk about looksmaxxing a little bit. Not really related to this topic. I guess it is related. It's kind of culture related. People want to look good. I think I immediately see a big problem with looksmaxxing is that they're really just focusing on how you look over everything, which is just dumb. I think that's obvious. You are going to die. You are going to get old. I don't know how far technology is going to go, but I don't know how far technology is going to go, but it doesn't even matter because you will die. So I don't know if it's going to be able to keep you looking good forever. And what are you even getting out of it? You're more degenerate, more easily. Good job. You're just going to be a depressed person. But I don't blame people for trying to look better. I I don't think you should ruin your health over it, but it remains to be seen if they're ruining their health over it. But I thought the thing I thought really interesting. So this is the thing I thought is interesting with it was there's this huge obsession with the face, with looks maxing. They're not really focusing on other aspects. It seems as much. They're like the face is everything. And they're also focusing on really interesting things that I've never thought to focus on, which it seems very autistic or something. Maybe that's not the I should probably stop using that word. It's very just obsessive about very specific things. And what do I mean by that? Like one thing that looks maxing, it seems that they're really about is like they're really about the shape of the face, like right here, and including the eye sockets, which might be legitimate, but honestly, just speaking as a man, when I've been in a relationship with a woman or attracted to a woman, I don't know if, and maybe it's subconscious and maybe I did think about these things, but I wasn't really paying attention to like their like facial bone or like the like depth of their cheeks or something, or their facial cheeks or something like that. I think naturally we're drawn to other things. There's the more cruder stuff. I'm not going to mention in this podcast, but men and women are attracted to each other for certain physical characteristics outside of the face. But then even in the face, like when I meet a woman, I don't know if I remember. I'm like, oh, those cheekbones were very attractive, or they were very defined. Maybe it's because I don't have them. Maybe that's why I'm so upset. No, I'm just kidding. Freudian analysis or something. But when you think about a woman that you like or your wife who you married or something like that, I don't know. I'm thinking more about like, oh, they had a really nice smile, a pleasing smile. They had beautiful eyes, right? Which I don't know if you can look smash that. Maybe you can wear color contacts or something. Um, I don't know if girls think about guys' hair that, as much as a guy thinks, that girl has really beautiful hair. And maybe there's some looks maxing stuff about that. It just seems really weird. Like the looks maxing thing almost seems like, what would you say, like very robotic or just very non-human. It seems less humane, maybe, or they're trying to make it less humane than it just is. Is like guys like girls, girls like guys, and there's just naturally attractive things that doesn't necessarily have to do with these like very mechanical aspects of the face. They have like equations and stuff for your face and the proportions and stuff. And I'm sure there's some legitimacy to that. But on the other hand, I'm like, I don't know. That seems kind of weird. And it seems like it's just making, the way, sorry, I just slammed my chair there. Like they're making the way of attraction, human attraction to the opposite sex. It's getting way too, it maybe, and it definitely already was too objectifying. But even with the looks maxing, it's getting like almost like computerized or something like that, mathematical, where it's just like, no, that woman's beautiful. I'm going to talk to her, see if we have some good rapport. Down the line, maybe we get married. Seems more natural, and I can already see the objections that looks maxers might be having, but I don't know. Can you just go out and just find a good woman that's physically attractive to you, that shares your religious beliefs, your moral outlook, is going to be by your side, is going to be faithful and true? Is that too hard? Do we have to do like the chiseling of the cheeks? I'm literally hearing people talk about, it's like, well, if you starve yourself, but you don't want to eat a lot of salt, then your cheeks will go in and that will be more attractive. It's like, I don't know. It seems like a lot. And I don't even know if it's going to help you, but I won't mention that. It is funny that sometimes the people, like, I'll show people a looks maxing person. They're like, oh, they're really attractive. And it's like, well, I guess maybe it's working out. But at the same time, it's like people can be like, Brad Pitt's attractive, and it doesn't necessarily mean I'm attracted to him in the way like I want to be with him the rest of my life, or even just be with him at all. Anyway, I'm kind of ranting on that now, but the looks maxing thing is such an interesting phenomenon in the culture. I don't think it's compatible with Catholic culture. Beauty is dangerous though in the Catholic life. St. Alphonsus Liguori talks about is like you should love God's will and thank God that He didn't give you more attractive or less attractive face, because if you had that, you would have lost your soul. Think of all the attractive people that get into a lot of trouble because of how good they look, right? And to someone who doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in heaven or hell, that's going to sound like a cope. But if you know those things are true, which they are true, then you understand what God is doing. So don't worry about it too much. It is interesting stuff, though. I'm not gonna, be a stickler about it, and I'm not gonna ignore it. I'm interested in these things. I like to see where the culture's going, and this is definitely an interesting aspect of it. And it kind of speaks to like the emptiness of our society. Like these people are willing to do extreme stuff to their bodies and their face just for the slight chance, or maybe the big chance, whatever it is, that they'll get more attention from the opposite sex. They'll get more success in terms of their jobs, in terms of how people treat them. That's very shallow. It's very shallow. We like virtue here. We like goodness. I was gonna say we like beauty. We do like beauty too, just not to that, for that end, I guess you could say. But that's all we have for tonight. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave a comment. I'm still waiting for this flood of comments. I think I got to make 100 videos before I get a comment. I'm going to start talking about more controversial things, but they just haven't been on my mind. I'm just kind of speaking my mind here. But they'll come and I'll get in trouble and it'll be great. No worries at all. But please make sure you do those 3 things. And then, yeah, God bless you. God be with you. And I will see you on the next episode. Good evening. God bless.